Life of David Livingston, Part 51. In 1856, Captain Borton, whose pilgrimage to El Damiria and Mecca had just made a sensation in the reading world, explored and, with the lamented Speke, a considerable portion of East Africa. The explorations of Grant and Speke in this portion of the continent were also of the greatest value. There thus was a knowledge of the expanse lying between Lake Nyasa, Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, Nyanza, and the Indian Ocean, made known to the world. The explorations of Sir Samuel Baker and others in search of the sources of the Nile are familiar to the intelligent public. At this moment, there are at least two expeditions engaged in attempting to solve this interesting geographical problem, one under the patronage of the Prince of Wales and the other under the Khedive of Egypt. And this latter is a representative of the same American journal whose search expedition under Mr. Stanley discovered the great discoverer of the shores of Tanganyika. The most interesting and valuable series of explorations from the west coast of Africa which have been made of late years were those of Paul B. du Chaillu, an American traveler and student whose work has been freely quoted in this volume. His explorations embrace some degrees of latitude and 6 longitude near the equator. He penetrated far into the country of the gorilla and the cannibal, and his researchers in respect to the people, animals, vegetation, birds of this part of the continent are confessedly of great value to science. Thus, if we consider the known portions of Africa at the time of Dr. Livingston began his first expedition of discovery and compare them with those known portions of Africa at the time of the finding of Livingston by the Herald expedition, we shall see that nearly all South Africa and much of East Africa has been explored by Livingston himself, that Baker, Burton, Speke, Grant have added much to our knowledge of the supposed regions of the Upper Nile and the Lake Country of East Africa, that Richardson and Barth have informed us of the true nature of the Desert of Sahara, and later adding a vast fund of information in respect to North Central Africa, and Dr. Chaillu's explorations and direct information among almost impinge upon the vast area both upon the east and south explored by Dr. Livingston. The unexplored regions of Africa, therefore, are now small in comparison of the regions explored in regard to which trustworthy information had been gathered, whereas when Dr. Livingston went to Africa, only the outer portions of the continent had been examined, and regions now unknown are a wide belt eastward of Lake Tsad, a considerable expanse south of Abyssinia, portions of the desert of Sahara and of Kalahari, and that expanse in equatorial Africa between the recent explorations of Livingston among the supposed not reached sources of the Nile and the eastern limit of Dr. Chaillu's journeys. It is true that these still unexplored regions embrace the most interesting portion of the continent and extend over an area several times larger than that of France, but in comparison to the portions of this great division of the earth which have now come under the view of the study of civilized man, they are but a little cloud in a clear sky. Within the long explored regions of South Africa, a most important discovery in respect to commerce has recently been made. Reference can be had, of course, only of the discovery of the diamond fields of the Orange and Vaal rivers, some 700 or 800 miles by a traversable route northeastwards of Cape Town, but considerably nearer to the Port Elizabeth and Cape Colony or Port Natal on the east coast. Some 20 years ago, England abandoned the tract of country now known as the Orange River Free State, and it was occupied by emigrant Boers, some of whom also proceeded still further north and established the Transvaal Republic, a region over which Great Britain never had dominion. The Boers are generally supposed to have been descendants of the Dutch colonists, and by some they are believed to be descended of certain warlike North Germans, whom the Dutch employed to guard their distant settlements. giving them lavish lands and grants in return for their services. The latter option would seem to be substantiated by the fierce, warlike nature of the present race of Beors. The diamond fields commence near the junction of the Orange and Val rivers and extend indefinitely up both those streams. The diamond region is described as desert country, bare rock and sand, and from the upland pastoral districts where the Beors successfully conduct agricultural pursuits. The fields are reached by a journey of some 800 miles from Cape Town. The distance from Port Elizabeth is about 500 miles, and from Port Natal about 450. By the Port Elizabeth route, the traveler passes over the Zumberg Mountains and over the Drakensberg Range. Should he start from Port Natal by either route, the scenery is described as magnificent and calculated to put the traveler at once in love with the whole country. But the region, Port Natal, and the diamond fields is more wild and desolate than on either of the other routes, and great suffering is often experienced by this way. The first South African diamond is said to have been found on March 1867. The fortunate person was a Dutch farmer named Schalek van Niekerk, who was struck with the appearance of the stone with which some children were playing, and turned it out to be a genuine diamond, and was purchased by Sir Philip Wodenhouse, but without the D, or without the L. Wodenhouse, then governor of the colony, for $2,500. In a short time after, the governor purchased several other fine, valuable stones. In May 1869, a magnificent diamond, star of the south of Africa, was discovered by a man named Swartbooi near Sandfestine on the Orange River, and was a diamond of 83.5 carats, and was purchased for $56,500. Being cut, it produced a fine gem of 46.5 carats. It went from 83.5 carats down to 46 being cut. That's the biggest they could get out of it, because it's a irregular shape, I guess. The finder of this diamond sold it for 500 head of sheep, 10 cattle, and a horse. In a single year, since their discovery, these fields have yielded more than 5 stones above 40 carats. Professor Tennant thinks that we shall have diamonds from South Africa exceeding the famous Kohinoor diamond in size and equaling it in beauty when cut and polished. The Sultan of Matan of the island of Borneo has a diamond of the first water weighing 367 carats and worth at least $3,500,000. The Orlov diamond, belonging to the Tsar of Russia, weighs 195 carats but is worth only about $500,000 on account of being little of color. A little off color. It is not too credulous to believe that the diamond fields of South Africa may produce stones equal to those in which will throw the fabulous moonstone about which Wilkie Collins has written one of his most fascinating stories completely in the shade. These diamond fields have already been visited by great numbers of explorers, many of whom have been exceedingly lucky, while others had better remained at home. Astonishingly few scenes of lawlessness and violence have been witnessed, a fact which is owing to the peaceful nature of the Africans, who do the most for their digging. The results of the discovery of this extraordinary diamond region was greatly to lower the cost of rough diamonds for a season. It is not believed that the price will permanently be affected. Only about a tenth of the African diamonds are of the first water. The ordinary trade in diamonds has been about 800,000 a month, 400,000 from the mines of South America and India, 400,000 from private parties. The increase of the South African fields has not yet been 100,000 a month or anything like it on average. The introduction of machinery and capital to direct the control of the workings will doubtless largely to the yield of the precious stones. Rubies are also found here in large numbers, but they are generally small. The probability of the discovery of gold is also very great. Reflecting upon these recent explorations and discoveries in Africa, how different would be the bird's eye view of the continent now from what is when Dr. Livingston first went ashore at Cape Town. The extreme southern portion of the continent is under the dominion of Great Britain on the east and northeast of Natal and the Beoor regions of Orange River and the Transvaal. Here, of course, we find the people not unlike the peasantry of Europe, with towns and cities and farms and manufactures and commerce. The political institutions are liberal, and the popular education supported by the state is becoming general. The original inhabitants of the region were the Hottentots, a race being more resemblant to the Mongols than that of Negroes, having broad foreheads, high cheekbones, oblique eyes and beards, and a yellow complexion. They are of a docile disposition and quick intellectual perception. They are possessed with vast herds of cattle and flocks of sheep, and were enslaved by the Dutch. Emancipated in 1833 by England, they are still found all over this region, still enslaved by the Beoors and their so-called republics, and in small bodies here and there to the great distance in the interior. The Kaffirs, who inhabit the eastern portion of South Africa of the British possessions and form a large portion of the population of the northern part of Cape Colony, are described by Livingston as tall, muscular, and well-made. They are shrewd, energetic, and brave. Altogether, they merit the character given them by military authorities of being magnificent savages. Their splendid physical development and form of skull show that, but for the black skin and woolly hair, they would take rank with the foremost of Europeans. Near the east coast of Africa, the Kaffirs are brown and copper-colored. Their government is patriarchal, a petty chief presiding over each kraal or village, who is tributary to a higher chief, and these higher chiefs owe allegiance to the great chief, of whom there is a national council, and they live by hunting, raising cattle, and their women attend to the agriculture. They have no notion of a supreme being, but are exceedingly superstitious in respect to witches, spirits, and the shades of their ancestors. The missionary labors of more than 40 years have made no perceptible impression on these stalwart race, except those who live under the British colonial government, and these have only been partially won over to civilization. Kaffir women are described as superior in beauty to their native races of South Africa. Then farther and farther to the left, still looking northward, we have the Bushmen, who are described by Livingston as true nomads. Then we have come to the Gripequas, independent people north of the Orange River. By them is meant any mixed race sprung from natives and Europeans. These are the Dutch extraction through association with Hottentot and Bushwomen. Many of these have adopted Christianity. The human inhabitants of the Kalahari Desert are Bushmen and Bakalari, the former supposed to be the Aborigines of South Africa, and the latter the remnants of the first emigration of Bakwains. Both of these singular people are possessed of an intense love of liberty, but the Bushmen live almost exclusively on wild animals, while the Bukakari are an irrepressible love of flocks and domestic animals. They produce a precarious exuberance over the dry expanse of the Kalahari. East of the desert are the Bakwains, among whom Moffat and Livingston labored. These, numbering many different tribes, inhabit a large portion of southern Africa, and by their migrations under Sebetene have for a number of years also held a vast territory on the Shobe and Zambezi rivers north of Lake Ngami. Many of the southern tribes have embraced Christianity and are noted for their intelligence and desire for progress. Between the southern Bakwanas and their relatives, the Makalolo, are the Bamagwanto, and the Bayinye are the latter, the Quakers of Africa, who do not believe in fighting. The former are sufficiently savage and indolent. They live round about Lake Ngami and to the westward of the Kalahari, as far northward as the country under Portuguese dominion. We observe a region possessing many fertile tracts. A wide expanse is called Namakwa land and is sparsely inhabited by Hottentots, among whom live a few Dutch. Northward of these are the Damaras, whose domains extend far into the interior, but of whom little is known. Far up the east coast extends the country of Mozambique, long known to geography. Near the middle of the country, the waters of the Zambezi empty into the Indian Ocean. Far up this stream, we find many tribes of ignorant men, and all of them are polygamous, but none until we reach the watershed of the South Africa devoted to distinguished fetishes. There were the country to the far there where the country is for a vast distance an immense flat with a river, part of whose sluggish waters seek outlet in the Atlantic and part in the Indian Ocean. We see the Negroes of those most savage nature and the most degrading superstitions. And as we cast our vision westward towards the Portuguese colony of Angola, we find them becoming more and more degraded through the immense territory of the Balanda until we reach the magnificent valley of the Congo and begin to perceive the beneficent effects of civilization, even though its representatives have not been of the best. We shall look in vain over the whole expanse of Lower Guyana for notable prospects cheering to the cause of man's advancement. Then, extending our vision northward and eastward over what may convenience sake be called the equatorial region of Africa, we shall observe great lakes and rivers on the east, lakes scarcely less great in significance than those in the interior of North America, while at the west we perceive extensive rivers and immense forests. Here the nobler wild animals do not live, but repulsive apes and cannibals possess the gloomy side of the vast wilderness. Near the eastern portion of the expanse of the great explorer of Africa is at this time engaged in traversing that now most interesting portion of the globe whence spring the sources of the Nile. Still further north and extending nearly across the continent, we see an immense territory crowded with a commercial trading people whose cities have become noted for ages through the reports of caravans who brought their goods of gold across the desert to the Mediterranean Sea. On the right of the desert, we find the Abyssinia, Nubia, and Egypt. The desert itself is seen to have many oases, stately mountains, and a place of growth of singular trees. Its caravans are sometimes submerged by the terrible simoon, kind of like a monsoon, but it's a simoon. But the robbers of the desert are more cruel and destructive than the winds and the sands. On the north of the Sahara, we see countries bordering on the Mediterranean, where the ancient times the great rival of Rome exercised superior authority, which was doubtless wrested from Carthage in a calamity of mankind. To the westward of this famous seat of ancient empire, the French now have a numerous and prosperous colony. Still further westward, we are looking upon the Pillars of Hercules. We look out upon the Pillars of Hercules, live the remnants of a singular people who once possessed a large part of Spain, and whose melancholy fate has been rendered wonderfully interesting to the intelligent of all the lands by the great and tender genius of the American Irving. The descendants of the old possessors of Granada and builders of the Alhambra may now be found in northwestern Africa and penetrating deeply into the regions of the desert with little to suggest the ancient taste and culture and warlike prowess. With the exception of Liberia and the English, Portuguese, Dutch, French colonies, and of late some of the Bakwains who have become Christianized, the people of whom we are taking this rapid view are devoted to polygamy. As it exists throughout nearly the whole of the vast continent, it is both a social and political institution of all these people. Perhaps those only who are actually progressive are the Bakwains under Shell, the Mokoloko under Sekeletu, successor of the greatest of South African chieftains, Sebetunane, some of the colonists of extreme South Africa, and a province or two of central West Africa. Confining our view now of the physical aspect of Africa, we perceive that the four great rivers of the Nile, Zambezi, Kwango or Congo, and the Niger. The Orange River of the south is of less magnitude, as is the Senegal in the west. Of these, the Nile is the greatest and most interesting, the most interesting river perhaps in the world. The Niger drains much of western and central Africa, and with its affluents from the system of drainage for an immense empire. The Congo is the principal river of central South Africa, but between it and the Niger are the Gaboon and the Fernand Vas, with their many affluents. The Zambezi is seen to drain in a region many times greater than Great Britain. The Orange, with its affluents, is at least equal to the Ohio of the United States. All these rivers, with the exception of the Nile, force their way through mountains which reach almost unbroken range around the continent of Abyssinia northwestwards to Cape Colony, then northwestward to Senegambia, whence they shoot off in broken fragments over the desert of Sahara. The northern half of Africa is chiefly Mohammedan, and southern half chiefly pagan. In the north we have sheikhs, khedivas, sultans, harems, intrigues, treachery, vindictiveness, and tortures. In the south we have man-eating, superstitions, fetishes, degradation, but unquestionably, as I think, very much less of man's inhumanity to man. North and south, except where the English have control, domestic slavery exists in its most cruel forms, but nowhere in the world has it ever existed, perhaps in such monstrous shape of inequality as in Central Africa, under the rule of Islamism. Dr. Barth accompanied the Sheikh of Bornu on a predatory slave-catching expedition into the Musgu country. On one occasion, he thus relates the principal business of that single day. The village we had just reached was named Kamakala and is one of the most considerable places in the Musgu country. The large number of slaves had been caught this day, and in the course of the evening, after some skirmishing in which 3 Bornu horsemen were killed, a great many more were brought in. Altogether they were said to have taken 1,000, and there were certainly no less than 500. To our uttermost horror, not less than 100 of the and 70 full-grown men were mercilessly slaughtered in cold blood, the greater part of them being allowed to bleed to death, a leg having been severed from their body. That's the spot we will stop.